Well, good morning. It's Saturday morning. It's time to see what this microcosm pedal can do. Hopefully you can hear me, and I'm here to demonstrate some aspects of the microcosm pedal, as well as just show you some of the features and how I use it, so that you might be able to get some glimpse for how it might fit into your workflow, or you might find some good alternatives to that. So here we go. Let's start off with the basics so you can kind of hear what I'm putting into this. Alright, so I'm using my deluge to just generate some sequenced patterns, so you can kind of hear this is just the raw signal coming from the deluge. And we're going to start out with kind of the first thing that the microcosm can do, which is you take whatever signal you're doing and permute it in some sort of way. So the first thing we're going to try is kind of micro looping. So it's just like taking segments of your loop and splitting it up, chopping it up, and doing different things. With each kind of setting within a microcosm, there's 4 modes of operations. So we'll go through what those are. Right now, the microcosm's not really doing anything. It's all turned off. I'm going to turn up the mix, so you can kind of hear what this mosaic is doing. It's slicing up the audio, chopping it up, and then in some cases pitch shifting it. So this is the mosaic setting. It's pretty nice, and you can change aspects of how quickly it chops things up. So let me turn up the velocity. See if we hear any differences. It really depends on your beat as to whether or not some of this makes sense. In this particular beat I'm doing, it's hard to tell. Kind of, is it best to chop it up, in slow time ranges, or speed it up exceptionally? So it's one that you really have to experiment what's going to fit. All right, so Mosaic. And Mosaic has, in each of the modes of the microcosm, there are 4 settings that you can choose from. Generally, the first one is like the most subtle, so it actually lights up here. So the first light, when you turn the little knob here, is kind of the first setting. We're going to turn it to the second setting. The second setting tends to add lower notes to whatever you're putting in. So here is an example of adding a low bass beat to whatever you're doing. We turn it to the third setting. Generally, the third setting in each of the different modes is going to add some sort of high range. And this one sounds very similar to the mode 1 for Mosaic, just slightly different. And then the final mode is kind of a bit of everything. And so this is the fourth mode. So you can see it's adding low end and it's adding some high ends to whatever signal I'm putting in. Now, the signal I'm generating is really tight, small notes. But if I add more kind of longer notes, sometimes the effects are quite dramatically different. In fact, let me turn down the tempo so we can get to more ambient range. Let me change the sample too. Okay, so the raw signal I'm going to put in sounds like this. Oh yeah, that one's nice. Okay, so I'll add a beat there, and let's turn up the microcosm mix. Here it's adding both some high end and some low end to this mix. So if we just want high end, switch it to channel 3. Or some low end. Alright. So that's the Mosaic setting of the microcosm. So, other fun features that this pedal can do, it's designed to be a looper in and of itself. So that's one of the reasons why I got it, was it has a decent looper, and a looper that actually quantizes your kind of pushing of looping, so that if you're not quite on beat, it'll automatically kind of adjust it so that your end of a loop actually matches a particular beat. So into the microcosm, I'm actually putting in MIDI. So there is a MIDI signal coming in, and if you give it a MIDI clock, it'll happily accept that and use that to sync your what you're doing, including the looper. You can put into a quantized mode that lets you sync whatever you're looping to the beats that you're generating. So we can put this at a decent tempo. Let me give you something more rhythmic. And we can use this just as a looper. In fact, let me turn off my signal so you can just hear the loops part. Okay, we're just going to hear the loops then. Here we go. Let me re-record. So I didn't have to be that precise when I hit the looper pedal, which was kind of nice. The other fun thing that I like to do in performance stuff for the type of music I like to make is doing the reverse looper. So, I can keep my normal mix going, and then I can choose to reverse the recorded audio of the looper. And this is something that any looper pedal can do. The nice thing about the microcosm is you can have the loop signal occur prior to the effects, so you can actually add effects to whatever looping signal is. So I have nothing coming into the microcosm, this is all just the looper, and I can add my effects to the looped signal, which is a nice feature. So as I change what I'm adding into the mix, it's going to use my looped sections to make that happen. Yeah, so it's a nice looper. It's the quantized aspect of the looper is especially nice for me because I'm not very precise at looping things, so it allows me to be act more precise when I'm not. All right, let's stop the loop. All right, the next thing that I want to demonstrate is to show what the microcosm is going to do with drums. So let's start with just a basic let's get just a house beat here. Oh, we need to speed this up here. Okay, so we have a house beat going, and the microcosm can do some interesting things with drums. And let's go ahead and see what that can do. So this is the interrupt glitch effect. And it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but every time the microcosm adds something to the mix, the lights on the main kind of centerpiece turn orange, really bright orange. Here on the camera, for some reason, it doesn't pick it up, but visually, it's pretty cool. Now, because I'm getting the MIDI signal in, it's actually triggering the effects to happen. They're happening randomly, but they always kind of trigger on an actual beat because I'm giving it that MIDI signal beat. I can adjust how often things occur by a couple different buttons. There's a time tempo button, which is how often it'll wait for a trigger and try to activate. And depending on what effect you're doing, this kind of time tempo matters a lot. Whether it's kind of on tempo, every half beat, every quarter beat. Another kind of effect that you can do, how often things occur, there's an activity switch, and depending on how this is turned, more activity, the more likely it's going to interrupt or do the effect. If you turn it down, it occurs less frequently. There's also that's things like stuttering effects and other elements. There's a repeats button that will you can turn to say how often a given effect will keep repeating over and over again. Oftentimes there's variations within a given effect, and so it's how often a variation will repeat. All right. Let's see. Another thing that the microcosm has is an envelope generator for the actual effects that it's producing. Right now I have it, in a square shape, so it's, which basically means kind of full-on effect. But you can also have it so that it has a slow attack. So this is, I don't know if you can tell the difference. Here I can turn up the mix a bit more. But here we have, anytime the effect happens, it's now going to have a slow attack. With this setting, there's a shape where it's a ramped up attack and a ramped down. Or you can have it a fast attack but slow decay. And depending on the effect and the type of music, you can change, this. For drums and stuff, it makes sense to just keep it fully saturated. So essentially the full gate. All right, so that's drums. Other effects do not sound very great with drums, so let's try a couple different patterns with drums. So here we have the ARP setting. ARP setting just seems to interrupt and do some strange things, so not that interesting. I really do like the interrupt with drums because it adds that extra kind of thing that you would normally add for ratcheting and the like. The blocks one is also not my favorite with drums. Blocks is a glitch effect that's does some pitch shifting and does some other things, and with drums it just kind of is blah. Ooh, glide is kind of nice with drums. It adds some sort of, it does something special with it. All right, let's try the sequence setting. Yeah, see, that's not very pretty. Sequence is good when you want to add, a rhythmic pattern to something that's pretty mild, and so it doesn't do very much when you. Oh, that's kind of interesting. This is like adding a bunch of crazy noise, and then that's just doing. Mosaic, just adding some extra micro loop stuff. That's kind of cool. Not too bad. And then there's a bunch of haze and granule based settings. Let me show you what that's gonna do. So drums is always kind of your mileage may vary. Drums always sound kind of weird when you add too much reverb. So right now I have the microcosm in a setting where there's really no reverb right now, but I can turn it up. And here's like a common horrible sound when you add reverb to drums. It just kind of adds weird effects there. Okay. So drums. Because of this I often consider just kind of recording drums separate than everything else that I'm doing, because drums and effect pedals seem to not always mix. Okay, so we're going to add some trying to find a decent sound to add. So this is just the deluge, just selecting. Oh, that's kind of nice. Okay, we'll go with this one. Alright, so let's add Haze. So this is a section of the microcosm is a set of granule based effects. So we're going to go into Haze. It's the first setting. It's just adding kind of light wobble to it. The second setting is going to tends to add bass. The third setting tends to add a extra high end, which is hard to hear in this case. So let me turn it down. Yeah, there you can hear a bit more. So it's adding it some high end. So here's the original signal. Here's what it's adding. That's nice. And the fourth setting is adding both high and low ends, so you can hear it triggering this. If I adjust the time, you can, it's how often it triggers. But in all these cases, it's triggering based upon my MIDI clock, which is nice because it keeps everything in sequence. Let's turn to just effects. So this is just the full just effects mix. One of the knobs that I don't find that useful, but your mileage may vary, is the filter knob. So there's a way to filter the effects that are coming in. It'll also filter the reverb, but it won't filter the dry signal. So turn the filter, you can kind of starting to peel off the high ends. And right around 10 o'clock, it kind of cuts things off. So you can create some nice effects. All of these knobs that I'm turning are MIDI controllable, so you can use your MIDI CV or CC signals to turn these knobs, or sequence them, or do other kinds of things. But in general, this filter knob kind of turns things off or turns things on. Here's with the full signal. See, you can see it. You can hear that it's filtering just the effects. Yeah, so that's kind of nice. There's some other kind of nice effects. The ones that I tend to use for the songs that I do are I tend to add high. I like to just add a bit more high end, a bit more sparkle to the songs that I'm doing. So this pedal seems to do pretty well with just adding that extra little bit of stuff to either high end or low end. And you can really control what it's doing there. One of the more interesting effects is this Strum Effect in the granule section. In this case, it's supposed to kind of sound like you're strumming or you're bowing a violin. So it's going to add a granule effect that has that kind of feature. So here's one version of that. Here's one that's adding some low end. it's adding some high end. And if I adjust the time range, you can see how often it triggers. So if this is more like tremolo, or you can ratchet it down to not occur very frequently. It can be nice. The final section for the microcosm is this multi-delay section, and this is adding all sorts of different kinds of delay patterns. One of the challenges I tend to have with this pedal is it sometimes just generates too much noise, and so there's ways to make things more subtle. Right now this is kind of a lot. First thing is just the mix knob. You can just adjust the wet mix. Your preference there. Certainly the filter is another thing you can do. So you can adjust and kind of tune in the effect that you want to have. There's another one, it's warp. It's adding just another kind of delay and warping and pitch shifting a little bit. That one's a bit nicer, more subtle than the pattern one. Another thing you do, if you don't like it, let's go back to the one that's kind of loud and too much. One of the reasons why it may be too much is because the shape of the envelope is just kind of all on. If we adjust the envelope of the effect so that it has a slow attacks and release, it can be more subtle. This is like full on. This is just a slow attack. This is slow attack and release. Or fast attack, slow release. And that can add some nicety to it. All right, let's see. So things I like about the pedal, it's a decent looper that has some nice looping effects. You can loop it, reverse it, and make it so that the loop kind of automatically quantizes to the beat you're dealing with as well, so that if you're not so good at starting and stopping the looper, this kind of does some stuff for you to try to sync it much better than I could on my own. Let's see, the effects are nice. You can dial them in. They add a little bit of glitchiness to what you're doing, or adding that extra bit of ARP and the unexpected. So most of the effects are randomized, and so they're not precise. They're not applying a precise filter, and so that randomness can be a nice just add to what you're trying to do. Let's see. Oh, the reverb is pretty nice. One of the challenges, all this demonstration I've done was completely without reverb, but it actually has a really nice, lush-sounding reverb. It's not as nice as some just pure reverb pedals, but it's a good way to kind of add that extra space for ambient work. Let's see. It seems to have a mode for whatever kind of music you're dealing with. If you're dealing with more kind of industrial and glitch-based music, there's certainly a whole section of glitch-related things that it can do nicely to kind of spice up that playing. It's definitely an ambient pedal, so just plug in anything that's ambient, and it seems to find some ways to make it interesting, whether that's adding more rhythm to what you're doing, like in this sequence section. Adding some more mystery to what you're putting in. The biggest question is it worth it? I'm not really sure. If you are a DAW primary person, someone who finishes their songs in a DAW, this is really something that's going at the end of my chain. I tend to put this at the end of my mixer, so that I can apply this to the entire mix. There's also cases where I just apply it to a single synth or a single source coming in. If you're already kind of mixing in a DAW or composing in a DAW, you can get VSTs that pretty much do the same kind of thing. You just have to look for VSTs that do granular or micro looping or glitching or various delays, and can get very much similar effects for that. If you are into live performance and looping, and your workflow is more immediate, it can be a nice pedal for that, because there's lots of different ways to use this in live performance, both in terms of as a fancy looper that can be add effects, as well as just kind of add that extra layer of goodness to what you're doing. I think one of the best things that sets this apart from other kinds of effects pedals is the ability to accept the MIDI signal in and use that kind of triggering so that it triggers randomized versions of the effects that it's trying to produce at the proper synced beats. And I think I haven't seen that in many other kinds of effect pedals, where it actually will randomize its effect and trigger it appropriately on the right kind of sync clock. I think that's where this really seems to shine, is when you want that synced effect. You want essentially the equivalent of having another randomized robot player that will add some extra spice to a mix and do it properly on beat. So there we go for that. Let's see. Non-obvious things. Let's try some other fun. Alright, let's try a different mix here. Okay, so this is my raw mix. So one of the nice parts about the looper is it has this like burst mode. That you can do the phrase looping kind of immediately, and it'll immediately play back. So I just captured that last part of the song, and then it has some decent ways to shift that up and down. Just shift it. or shift it down. So it's immediately adding this. In fact, this is reversing and shifting it down. So for live performance, you can see that you can add that extra. You want to add low end to something that's that you're doing that's interesting. That can be a lot of fun. So here's just the pure loop. Here's the original one. The other cool thing is that we can add effects to the loop. All right, let's see. I am happy to answer questions that you might have on this particular piece, or show you anything that in more depth if you want to see anything particular. So I'm going to turn to the live chat and see what people think. Let me turn off that annoying loop. Oh, I also failed to mention some other kind of ways to have a microcosm-like effect without the cost, because this is a pretty expensive pedal right now. It's one of the things that I tend to use, in fact, in the months of waiting for my microcosm to arrive, I wanted to see if I could produce something similar to what the microcosm is producing. And so I got a NTS1, which is, let me show you what that is. So Korg makes this NTS1. They also make some other things that are similar, the MIDI log and other devices there. This one's a fairly cheap device. It has some, you get a kit and you build it. You don't have to do any soldering. It just kind of, you put it together. But on here you can get custom effects and synthesizer oscillators for this, and there are some purchased effects that you can get that have sounds that are similar to the microcosm, both in terms of glitchiness or granule loops or micro loops. And so if you're looking for a kind of cheaper alternative, and something that might fit within a lower budget. If you already have one of these, or something that can take the Korg log patches, I suggest looking into those, because that can give you similar effects. It doesn't have the MIDI sync, but in MIDI effects, particularly ambient ones, you don't really need the MIDI sync. The MIDI sync is useful when you're dealing with house music or other kind of beat-based music. It's nice to have effects on the beat. But if you're just doing pure ambient kinds of things, then the Korg can be a really nice alternative to just creating a lush effects loop, both for great reverbs as well as these kind of granular and spacey pieces that the Microcosm can do. All right. Any particular questions that people have? All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. If you would like some more details on a specific kind of aspect of this, just let me know. I'm happy to dive in deeper and try out other instruments on these things. The effect really varies depending on the source that you're putting in, whether that's a pad source or a tight melody. So here is certainly the different types of music that you use with this. It can add some extra low end, add some extra kind of glitchiness and unpredictability. So that can be a nice thing to do, just to add some extra kind of spice. That same kind of spice of what you want to put in, you can do with the DAW and other effects as well. So this is fun.